Um, okay, so you began this project in 2010. I'm curious, as storytellers, in addition to obviously, being particularly interested in WikiLeaks, was was your interest in this in part because of the strange turns that it took, or how, or I mean, at what stage precisely did you want to tell this story? And in some ways, as a storyteller, did everything that has happened since kind of captivate your focus a little bit?
Well, in terms of when we started, it's I think we were captivated by the ideas, and then we were captivated by the subject of Julian. And from the very beginning, and I somewhat could say this even at the end, I just couldn't quite summarize how I felt about him. And he remained elusive to me, and I was drawn to want to know more and more and more. And when I approached Alex about doing this, I had just seen an early screener of Client 9, his Eliot Spitzer movie, and I marveled at how he held Eliot on screen for all of his complexities and contradictions as a subject without ever reducing him to a single simplistic takeaway. And I thought that's exactly what you need if you're going to capture the confounding complexity and personality of Julian. So, so that was what we were thinking about and talking about at the beginning of the process. Toward the end, he still remains mysterious in many ways. I think that's part of his persona, the hair and the look and it's just, and he's obviously dazzlingly brilliant. And as someone says in the film, a professor from Australia, and I think so accurately calls him a fabulist. He is an individual who invents, reinvents himself constantly, so that who he is changes all the time. And he makes for an incredibly fascinating figure in that regard. There was, at one point we were joking, half joking, but a little bit serious, when, gee, if we can't actually get what we need of Julian, we had talked about you representing him as an avatar in the film. But in a sense, that's a accurate way of thinking about him, because he is sort of he's a self-created persona that then the culture interprets according to the agenda that one projects upon him. And I think, again, that's one of the odd and interesting things that the film captures.
Sorry, one last thing.
Sure.
Because of so many, very dramatic twists and turns that happened during the years that you were filming, how did you decide to stop shooting? When did you know you were done?
That's a good question. We decided we wanted to go to Sundance with it, and so that kind of became the end point. And we were getting close to the end of the Bradley story, which was critical. Because look, the one thing I would say in the telling of it and what we found about it, we set out to tell the story of WikiLeaks, and in the end made a movie which is really a two-hander. It's the Julian Assange story and the Bradley Manning story. And the Bradley part of it was clearly now, the trial, we kept waiting for the trial to happen and kept getting pushed off. The government was, honestly, the Obama administration did not want the Bradley Manning trial before the election, because, it was just such an embarrassing reminder of how inept the institution was to allow this to happen. And but it was starting to come to some form of where it was close to an end, and we felt that the story that we wanted to tell and what we had to say about it, we had a fixed perspective at that point on, and so we could tell it. That said, it's one of those real life stories that you could go on forever following it, because it continues. So but we, the answer was Sundance.
Any questions? Yes.
The topic that I really wanted to see more of in the film starts to touch on it, but it is kind of hard to comment on. I would have wished to have seen more as a theme in the film is the one kind of issue in, and especially for all of us as like human beings, as storytellers, and as the kind of narrative point of view, is the point that it seems like at a certain point the very human like curiosity and desire for information and transparency of information to know what's going on that kind of feeds all of this breaks down into two categories of data and narrative, like the raw points, the raw pieces of information, and then the story we start to tell with it. And the data will almost always become, it seems, a slave to the narrative, like it does in this case. Like more than anything else, what stood out to me from both the movie and remembering the events happening was the story of Bradley Manning and the story of Julian Assange. And I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, he's real life 20th century Citizen Kane almost. But then I'm like, but shouldn't the more important thing be like these detainees being signed over to the Iraqi government? Shouldn't the more important thing be that? So where as storytellers and as people then using the data again to construct a narrative, do you think our responsibility lies in trying to say, are we hitting on the most important part of the data, or are
Well,
we just...
yeah, I mean, so did everyone hear the question? Yeah, everyone heard the question. Look, I think in terms of maybe the most explosive and critical of the political information that was exposed in the leaks. I mean, what we felt in terms of our responsibility as filmmakers was not to give short shrift to it. So that, one easy way of bringing down the length of the movie, for instance, would be to collapse the war logs together. Would be to somehow take the multiple waves of leaks and what was contained in each one of them and the significance of the information that was coming out in each one of them, and shorten that so that, and just kind of summarize it in such a way, for instance, so that the last of the war leaks that came out, which is the one where we really spent some time talking about the war crimes of the Obama administration, following in the footsteps also of the Bush administration before them, were probably guilty of. I mean, handing over prisoners to an authority in Iraq that we knew was torturing those prisoners. There's like a blatant violation of the Geneva War Convention. It's stuff like that, so that for us, I mean, it felt like it was critical that the substance of what had been discovered and communicated through the WikiLeaks and through the effort of the whistleblower, we wanted to be really clear and cogent in communicating that. Now, for you, it may not have been enough. For us, we certainly took great lengths to make sure that we had done it substantially.
It's definitely there. It's just...
But in the end, the story is the human story. In the end, and we weren't making yes, there are political elements to the movie for sure, but it's not a political movie. It's a movie about an organization and the individuals within the organization and the human flaws that individuals have that ultimately, come out over the course of the pressures and the undertaking of what the organization is trying to do. And so when we wanted to tell the human story, and the other thing that I just am awed at what Alex accomplished for me, and I don't know how you guys felt, but is that, the human heart of the story really is this kid Bradley Manning, who is represented through text. He has one line of audio in the entire movie, which was a voice recording from his answering machine saying, "You've reached my Bradley Manning and his deployment number," Otherwise, it's just, through text, this modern form of communication, which somehow we sit patiently and read on screen and feel an intimacy and a connection to the person behind it that I find really extraordinary. And so, but it's those are the elements that I think make it, for me, the most compelling elements. But
Yeah, thank you for the film.
Thank
I
you.
thought it was
Thanks.
fascinating, and I'm sure this debate, the story will unfold forever. Um, I had two thoughts that there's, as human beings, I think we have two different biases. With Julian Assange, we have this self-reflexivity bias, that if you are doing something that's morally righteous, you have to be a morally righteous person. I mean, we insist on this. So I wonder if Julian Assange was like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King, he would be treated very differently, and I think the whole debate would be very different. On the part of the Americans, and I include Americans because I think a lot of the time we have this tendency to separate the government and the people. We people are innocent, we are good guys, the government, they do all these things we don't want. But there the bias is, you can never falsify them. They can make statements, they have authority, they have power, they can break down anybody, but ultimately they're bad apples, we are the good guys. And that could never be falsified. And I think these two are the problems that we're facing. What do you think about that?
I think it's, I agree with what you're saying. I'll just say on the latter part, it's interesting, when I hear General Hayden in the film or the people speak on behalf of the institution or Hillary Clinton or Obama, I spent many years in institutions as a senior executive at studios. And, I was fascinated that, when you are a part of the institution, your moral compass and your human concerns, which define you as a person, are inevitably and unavoidably colored by the institution and the agendas and the needs of the institution. And at the extreme, you have, the idea of noble cause corruption that the film talks about at the end, which can happen it is kind of the worst of what can happen as an institution loses its way. And we talk about institutions, but it's individuals who lose their way, caught up in the beliefs and what were once the positive values of the institution, but then in the support of them, in the defense of them, begin to think things, say things, and do things that no longer represent the finest values that they originally were. I mean, to think that, you have an institution, Penn State could actually think it's the right thing to do to, not investigate what was happening in the shower rooms, with the coach, because he's part of one of the most valued parts of the institution. And so it was actually one of the things that also, it was an idea that really I was intrigued by, that drew me to the subject. But I agree with both of your points completely, in fact.